Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dr. Adam Rindy, and welcome to episode 3 of One Thing. I really appreciate you being here today. One Thing is a short-form health podcast that is based on the premise that action takes place with information and inspiration. Each week, we interview thought leaders in the fields of health, medicine, and science, and we discuss the latest information and drill it down into precise and digestible bites so that you can understand it, gain information, and take the inspiration to make the changes necessary in your own lives and the lives of your patients. In this episode, we explore the concept of post-meal glucose response. So, to set the stage here, I'm going to give you some background on this concept and on the episode. What the best diet is for us remains probably the billion-dollar question in health, nutrition, and medicine. The winner of this question will probably be a diet that's individualized, prevents the most disease, makes us feel great, and is intuitive and easy to follow. Sounds like lofty expectations to me, but that seems to be a quest that we're getting closer and closer to answering. There seems to be an approach in this field that's caught the attention of patients and providers, and that's looking at individualized post-meal glucose response as a guide to one's individualized dietary recommendations. And guess what? The researchers are saying that the post-meal glucose response is largely dependent on what kinds of bacteria are growing in our gut. Listen in on today's episode as we explore the individualized diet and post-meal glucose response. I'm going to give you some background information on today's episode so that you can follow along. More detailed information about this topic will be found on my website at soundintegrative.com/episode 3. So post-meal glucose response is defined classically as the rise in blood glucose measured in nanograms per deciliter after the consumption of carbohydrate. This measurement is usually tracked in segments of 2 hours post-glucose consumption. Now, with the advent of continuous glucose monitoring and self-monitoring, post-glucose response also can be done at 5-minute increments at this point in technology, meaning within 5 minutes after consuming a meal, we can see how that consumption is impacting our glucose instantaneously. As this technology comes more to the forefront, new parameters as to what is a healthy post-meal glucose response are likely to be developed. Why does this matter? As a biomarker, post-meal glucose response, which we'll call PMGR, reflects one's ability to regulate glucose. Glucose regulation means less inflammation in the body, which means less risk for heart disease, diabetes, kidney disease, eye disease, obesity. You get the picture. It's pretty important. Typically, in a non-diabetic, a fasting glucose will range between 70 nanograms per deciliter to 99 nanograms per deciliter. And after eating a carbohydrate-containing meal, the blood glucose will rise between 100 nanograms per deciliter to 140 nanograms per deciliter within 2 hours. This can be influenced by the protein and fat content in the food source. However, it's largely driven by the carbohydrate intake. Until researchers started looking at the gut microbiome as a factor in this scenario, the large dietary agencies that make recommendations for diabetics would look at the glucose content of foods and make predictions to how these foods would spike blood sugar. And they came up with a list called the glycemic index of foods. And this list is distributed to people with glucose regulation issues to follow as a parameters to look at foods to avoid and foods to include that will help regulate their blood sugar. Later, this evolved to a term called glycemic load, which looks at how a meal combined would potentially influence one's glucose response. Now, a group out of the Weizmann Institute developed a test and an algorithm of PMGR response based on the DNA sequencing of bugs that are growing in human guts. By monitoring post-meal glucose response in human subjects, they were able to predict that one's own signature gut microbiome can largely influence one's individualized glucose response to food. In today's episode, we unpack this approach. Let me introduce you to our guest. Richard Sprague lives and works in the Puget Sound region. He is most recently involved with the artificial intelligence area and the health technology space. He has a long career as a software executive. He's very involved in stool microbiome testing, and he's done over 300 samples on himself. That's one of the ways I met Richard. Is I had heard about him and reached out to him to discuss some of his impressions of the gut microbiome testing. And we sat down several years back and discussed some of the experiences I was having clinically with patients with IBS and Parkinson's disease. And we were trying to make sense of all this new stool microbiome data. And he was very helpful in helping me gain traction in this region. Now, we picked up a conversation recently talking about post-meal glucose response based on the stool microbiome data and his experience with testing and tracking his post-meal glucose response. So tune in. This is a very interesting and fun episode for me. I hope you enjoy it. And show notes will again be on soundintegrative.com in the podcast section. And thank you again for tuning in. So welcome to the show, Richard. It's good to sit down with you and talk.
Great to talk to you as well.
Thank you. I thought we'd jump right in and talk about the topic of the day, which we're talking mainly about your experience with testing yourself a number of times and most recently you've been diving into this post-glycemic meal response focus. And why don't we just start off and share what got you interested in this particular biomarker?
Well, so I'm I'm a longtime software engineer and an entrepreneur working in a lot of high-tech type companies. And so naturally, I'm kind of drawn to metrics that you can use to measure your body. And so over the years, I've tested everything from Fitbits to different ways of measuring sleep and lots of different things. And of course, I was involved in the microbiome for a long time and doing a lot of microbiome testing. I've always been looking for things that are actionable. And that's kind of the key thing, is that you could wear a Fitbit all day and the only actionable thing you might find out is that, well, I need to walk more, get more exercise more. Mm-hmm. What I found with doing continuous glucose monitoring is that it gives you something actionable like immediately, because you can immediately look at what you just ate and see how it affected your glucose response. And that's kind of the thing that really draw me into this and made me very excited about the potential of technology.
Tested yourself in various capacities. As far as stool microbiome testing, can you just give us a little bit of sense of where you started with that and where you are today?
Well, okay, so I started long ago with doing genetic testing, and one of my disappointments with genetic testing was that you find out something about yourself, like your eye color or your, in my case, it turns out that I have a gene that makes me predisposed to be addicted to heroin. Well, okay, that's great. What am I going to do with this information? It's all information my mother already told me. My ancestry, everything. My mother can already tell me that. And it's one time only. You learn about your genetics and that's it. Well, with the microbiome, your microbiome changes regularly. And you can do something about it. You can actually change your microbiome. So this got me very interested starting about 5 years ago, and working with a San Francisco lab called UBiome that I started using their tests. It's under $100 tests where I can test my microbiome. In my case, I did it daily for a couple of years, and then I wrote a lot of software that lets me do analysis on it, and just found a lot of very interesting things about about how my microbiome changes based on my diet and based on activities. Like I was on a business trip once to China, and I saw different kinds of microbes crawl in as I was there. Lots of those sorts of things. And but of course, at the end of the day, you really care about actionability. So I'm looking for something that really that's something that's not obvious, something that my mother might not have told me or might not have thought to tell me, but that has a real impact on my life. And along the way, I discovered there was this group at the Weizmann Institute in Israel that had done a fascinating study. I think you know about this one. That is where they found out that people respond differently to different kinds of food depending on what kind of gut microbiome they've got. And so this has been commercialized as a test from a company called Day 2. And so I tested myself with Day 2, and it gave me this whole list of things, many of which are non-intuitive about things that I should eat or should not eat. And the background of the test is it's based on your glucose response. And I wanted to know more directly what my glucose response was. And so one of the things that the authors of one of the books about this claimed is that if you get a continuous glucose monitor, you'd be able to see exactly from minute to minute how your glucose is changing. And so I tried that, and looking at the recommendations based on my microbiome, I found to my surprise, to my happiness, that it essentially agreed in a lot of cases.
That's excellent. The big thing that I hear a lot about this test is, someone will have made a wholesale change on their diet. Say if they have their risk for type 2 diabetes, or they're developing metabolic syndrome, and they'll take out and go on like a low carbohydrate diet. But what this particular technology allows you to do is say, well, it doesn't have to be pan low carb. It could be some of the carbohydrates that are identified. So in your case, I want to know, and I'm sure everybody wants to know, can you eat bread?
So yes, I can eat bread. A more interesting example is oatmeal, which is something that I had been told is healthy, and I've been eating for a long time for breakfast. I discovered that oatmeal spikes my glucose. Now, that actually was one of the things that was predicted by the Day 2 test. But along the way, I also discovered that so eating oatmeal with water causes a big glucose spike. But if I add some kind of fat to the oatmeal, it completely changes it. And so that's an example of something where now I discovered that if I add a little bit of butter to my oatmeal in the morning, I'm doing the same thing that I enjoy all the time, but I've made a slight tweak to it that suddenly makes it much better in terms of glucose response. So that's the kind of actionable thing that you want to find.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily something that says, make a wholesale change to your diet, completely change everything you've always done.
Right.
But you want something that's going to be doable and actionable. And in this case, I don't mind adding a little butter to my oatmeal.
Right. Yeah. So, one of the things that the group out of the Weizmann Institute is stating is that the only way to actually change this is to actually move to another country, get pregnant, or go on antibiotics.
Yeah.
So, meaning the only way to modify the results that you got back on Day 2. Mm-hmm. So has that been your experience? Or is that...
So I generally agree with that. That's right. For example, I tested my microbiome after doing a thorough colon cleanse, after as part of a colonoscopy, and then I tried carefully reseeding myself after completely wiping out all of the bacteria in my gut, and I found almost no difference before and after, within like 2 weeks. So within a week or two after having done this colon cleanse, my gut was right back to what it was before. Mm-hmm. And that was despite trying to eat different kinds of food. So I think it's really hard to modify your microbiome. Like the Weizmann guys and many others have pointed out that if you move to a foreign country and like radically change your environment, that will do it. That can make a difference. That's been shown, and that's also true in my case. I mentioned my trip to China, but otherwise, if you really want to make a major change, you would have to make a significant change in your diet and keep it going long term. And I don't know how long term is. When I've tested it, so for example, I've gone on a high fat, low carb diet for a 2-week period to see how it changed my microbiome. And it made a difference, like maybe a 20% change, that kind of thing. But then as soon as I went back to my old diet, just went right back. So a lot of these things, when people are talking about doing a permanent change, or I'm sorry, if you want to do a major change, you kind of have to make it permanent. and yeah, that's hard to do.
Okay. Okay. So with a continuous glucose monitoring, can you sense within yourself when you're going higher with a post
Yeah.
post-meal glucose?
So
What happens in that
so
situation?
this is the other thing that I learned about when doing glucose monitoring is that um, I have, because of that instant feedback that I get by looking at seeing what my glucose levels are right now, I'm now able to tell. I kind of can feel what it feels like to have a glucose spike or to be low on glucose. And that was something that I wasn't aware of in the past.
Right.
Now
Yeah.
I realize that people who have diabetes are probably very sensitive to this already, but it was something that it was new to me. And just that new appreciation has made it a lot easier for me to figure out what to eat and how much to eat. So that was really revealing.
Why is this important to, obviously it's if someone has type 2 diabetes or is about to enter into type 2 diabetes, they're on the verge of it. I'm sending them off to get this test in my practice. I'm ordering it for patients, the day 2 testing. But in other populations, like people who don't seem to have they're on the verge or they're not having any problems with glucose levels or their hemoglobin A1C levels are stable, why should they care about this approach to health?
Well, so again, if you're already healthy, then your goals are a little different than if you're somebody who's got prediabetes or something else. And in my case, for example, I'm healthy, but I want to be healthier. I want to be more active. I want to have better sleep. I want to just feel more energy throughout the day. And one of the things that I believe is true about glucose, I mean, glucose is correlated with the amount of energy that you have. It's correlated, obviously, with weight. So if you care about maintaining a healthy weight, just knowing the kinds of foods that cause your glucose to go up or down is just a good thing to know. One of the other things that I guess I've concluded on this is that I don't think it's necessary to wear a glucose monitor forever, like the rest of your life. Unlike, say, a Fitbit or something where or like an Apple Watch or something where you might want to just kind of track your exercise just over time. I found that having a glucose monitor just for a couple of weeks, maybe do it a couple of weeks every year, just to get kind of a little bit of, first of all, a baseline when you start, and then also just a double check to make sure that your body is still responding the same kind of way. I think that's super useful for people. Okay. Highly recommended.
Can you take us through the process of what it's like to wear one, how you apply it, and just the different supplies that are involved?
Yeah, so I found it is super easy. In the United States, you need a doctor's prescription, but because it's one of these things that's it's not very invasive. It's pretty easy to get a doctor to prescribe it. It cost me about $75 out of pocket for a month supply of the sensors, and the sensors are real simple to apply. It's like about the size of a quarter. You stick it under your arm in the kind of the fleshy part of the back part of like near your elbow. And there's a special kind of applicator. You just press on it. There's no needle, no blood. It just feels like kind of like a hard press on your skin. And it sticks this little thing they call filament into your skin in such a way so that it can detect the levels of glucose that are in what's called the interstitial fluid. It's not your blood. It's just the liquid that's under your skin. And that's it. And there's an adhesive on there, which will keep it going through. You take a shower, you can go swimming, and then it lasts for about 2 weeks. I'm using an iPhone to see the results, so I just spray my iPhone onto my it looks like I'm applying underarm deodorant. I just like put it on my underarm there. It tells me my glucose levels there. And at the end of the week, it's a 2-week thing, and so at the end of the 2 weeks, you just peel it off, and there you go. It's really simple.
And obviously, there's some other factors that people need to learn about besides just what we eat that can affect our blood glucose levels. Stress, illness.
Yep.
There's
exercise,
travel,
mm-hmm.
changing time zones.
Yeah.
Exercise. Yeah. So there's a lot of factors to think about, but this was a big mystery, I think, for until this research started to develop. So it's answered a lot of questions that were puzzling.
Yeah, and it's it really is amazing how getting that instant feedback can change change the way you think about it. One of my friends who is using a glucose monitor as well pointed out that he used to go to this restaurant every week and he'd eat the same thing there, a burrito or whatever, and he was looking at his glucose response and noticed it goes up fine. But one day he was looking back at his old results and he looked and it showed that it went up and then it went down and it didn't go up nearly as much as it normally is. And it turned out that was the day where he couldn't find a parking place And so after he'd eaten his meal, he was walking for an extra 15 minutes longer than he normally did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a classic example of the kind of tiny change you can make to your lifestyle that will make a significant difference in your glucose response. And those are the things I love to see.
Yeah, that's great. So share with us a little bit about what you're working on now, and give us some information about how to follow you and follow the work you're doing.
Well, I'm doing a bunch of things. I'm still very interested in the microbiome. As you know, I've accumulated now at this point over 600 data points of sampling my microbiome, and I'm trying to do the analysis on those things. I'm working on building a website at personalscience.com. So people who'd like to know more, welcome to go to personalscience.com, where I've written up like pretty much all of the conclusions that I've come to so far in my microbiome testing. And I encourage people to contact me with their own microbiome results or their CGM results. I love knowing more about what people are up to with the continuous glucose monitoring. And I'm also working with some people who do a lot of work with artificial intelligence. So we're hoping to gather enough data from a lot of people like me and normal people so that we can do some more analysis on it and hopefully find something that's interesting and actionable for other people.
Helpful. Thank you for walking us through your process and giving us a little education on continuous glucose monitoring and microbiome and how we can maybe develop more of a personalized diet. I just wanted one more commentary. There was a piece that just came out in the New York Times recently. I wanted to hear your thoughts about sort of the AI approach to nutrition. And this just came out maybe a week or two ago, I think. Can you just share a little bit about your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. So that's actually the same technology behind Day 2. So that was an article by Eric Topol, very famous personalized medicine physician. And he had access to a very custom version of the same technology that's behind the Day 2 product, where they did a very thorough look at his microbiome and a thorough look at his continuous glucose monitoring. And then they used a computer algorithm to go try to find patterns in it. And one of the patterns they found was there's a direct link between the types of microbes that you have and the glucose response. So the type of microbes he has are different than mine, different than yours. And the microbes are what's really eating your food for you in a lot of cases. And so if you have, in his case, I think he had unusually high, I think it was Bacteroidetes or something, where that was metabolizing some of his food in a way that would be different than the way it gets metabolized in me or you. And it's a very complicated thing to do these days. It still requires, very expensive testing and some pretty laborious look at, like some results from a continuous glucose monitor. But that's the type of technology that's just going to keep getting better and better. And I'm confident that within a few years, that's the sort of thing that we're all going to be able to do just routinely.
Yeah. So headed towards personalized diets.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you for being on today. We will be posting on the transcript of this episode and on our website and links to how to follow Richard and some of the work he's doing. And I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Stay tuned for closing thoughts with Dr. Adam Rindy. Hi, this is Dr. Adam Rindy, and these are some closing remarks from today's episode. The topic of today's episode was prompted by a research article that appeared in the 2015 issue, volume 163, 5th edition of Cell. The article was titled Personalized Nutrition by Prediction of Glycemic Response. The authors were out of the Weizmann Institute in Israel. The main authors were Weinberger, Rhine, Pevsner, Fishner. And later, two of the researchers from this group wrote a book called The Personalized Diet. These authors were Eran Elanov and Eran Segal. These two pieces really influenced this topic, and a lot of the research that's coming out in this area is being promoted by the group at the Weizmann Institute. Well, I'm really excited about this work. I do think that my own take is slightly different than the promoters of this approach. I am holding out that we do have the option to change our microbiota through food adaptations and supplementary prebiotic and probiotics and nutrient microtherapies. I also believe that we are learning more and more daily about which foods may modulate the microbiome. And in my practice, I test for a condition called dysbiosis, which is basically a pathogenic microbe situation in the gut where some pathogenic microbes may be overtaking the population of healthy bacteria and reducing their function. So in my practice, we do a lot of restoration of dysbiosis, and perhaps this restoration could help with restoring better glucose regulation in some of these patients. A lot of this work hasn't gone into the dysbiosis connection in these patients, and I think that is something that's being overlooked. I'm also quite aware of the impact of stress and sleep disorders on post-meal glucose response. So these are something to really factor in when we're thinking about this approach. So while I'm hopeful that this is going to help us to define a good roadmap for glucose regulation, I'm also aware there's more to the picture. What really excites me about this test is it's a launching point for pre-diabetics and diabetics who are struggling with managing their diabetes, to give them potentially a more easy roadmap to follow than sort of long lists or generalized recommendations. And also for people who are generally trying to feel well and lose weight, but might not be diabetic or might not have prediabetes, this may be another approach to think about that helps them get on the right track. And when learning what spikes your glucose after a meal may be a good biomarker to track for just general health purposes. I'm very excited about continuous glucose monitoring for this purpose, as well as a tool to help us with general health and also for tracking minute by minute diabetes management, glucose management. I look forward to continuing to apply this knowledge to my practice, and thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to help us, we'd like you to share this episode widely if you think it would help other people. I want to really get this information out there and get it in the hands of people who can use it. So if you could share, that'd be great. Also, click subscribe on your podcast player so that you get updates on the episodes as they come out. Thank you for tuning in to One Thing. We'll see you next time.